Hello, this is Brett Etheridge, founder of Dominate the GMAT, here with your GMAT tip of the week. The tip for this week is a data sufficiency tip, and it has to do with your mentality when you're evaluating the two statements. And here's the analogy I like to use. Have you ever watched Law and Order, or any of those law shows, those legal shows, right? Where maybe the defense is up there and he's proving his case and he's proving his point, and at some point he throws in some sort of controversial bit of evidence, right? And maybe it's this actual smoking gun bit of evidence, but for whatever reason it's not allowed to be admitted. And maybe the defense attorney knew that, maybe he didn't, but the point is he makes a no-no and actually says something to the jury that he's not allowed to say, right? The smoking gun bit of information. Now, what does the judge say? The judge says, oh, strike out, or the prosecutor says, objection, Your Honor. And then the judge turns to the jury and says, jury, strike that from the record, forget you ever heard that. Well, here's the question. Is it possible to unhear what you just heard? I mean, if it's a smoking gun bit of evidence, the jury may or may not care what the legal technicalities are. I just heard something incredibly incriminating. And it's very difficult to unhear that. And the same applies on GMAT data sufficiency. You know the rules. The rules say, when you're evaluating a data sufficiency question, you want to evaluate statement number one in isolation. And then, once you've made that determination, completely forget about that and evaluate statement number two completely in isolation. Here's the problem. It can be very difficult to unhear, to unsee what you already saw in statement one when you go to statement number two. And yet that's my tip for you. You need to be the judge, not the jury. You need to have that objective ability to unhear that incriminating piece of evidence. For example, take a look at this sample data sufficiency question. We're simply trying to identify what is X. And you look at statement number one in isolation, is it sufficient? Well, a lot of students would say, yeah, I know what X is. X squared is 25, so X is going to be 5. And well, if you're smart, if you're advanced, maybe you recognize that actually it's a quadratic equation which produces two possible values of X, right? Plus or minus 5. So X could be plus 5 or minus 5. Do I definitively know what X is? No, I don't. And so statement number one is not sufficient, which enables us to immediately eliminate answer choices A and D. And now the difficult part. I need you to be the judge, not the jury. You need to unhear, unsee what you've already done and evaluate statement number two completely in isolation. And when you glance down, what happens if you see that statement number two says that X is greater than 0? Your inclination when you've already done statement number one is to say, okay, that's enough information, right? I already determined that it's plus or minus 5. Statement two is telling me that X is greater than 0. That means it is sufficient. Does that make sense? But that's wrong thinking. That's you being the jury, not the judge. That's you forgetting that you're supposed to identify statement number two completely in isolation. And if you do that objectively, you recognize that statement number two also is not sufficient by itself because it gives us an infinite number of possibilities for X. X is simply greater than 0. It could be 1, it could be pi, it could be 10, it could be a million. It doesn't matter. We don't know definitively what it is. And so we have to eliminate B on its own, whereas a lot of students would look at that and decide that it was sufficient because they were the jury, not the judge. You need to be the judge, eliminate it as sufficient, and then notice that taken together, we can answer the question. The answer is C. So I hope this little analogy is helpful for you. Think about Law and Order when you're doing data sufficiency, and I think it will help you to avoid some careless errors as you're navigating data sufficiency. So with this, take this, apply it, and go out and dominate the GMAT.